in a black cloak, street gospel, light of the temple. Sword swing, killer live from the ghetto. The hood messenger, let them know hell's close. Black burial, the devil in a black cloak.
Yo, what is up? Welcome to the Street Gospel Podcast. I'm your host, Dave One, and I decided to do something a little different today. This is not your typical episode, and I know we've been doing a lot of bonus episodes with the Zoom, but today I wanted to do something a little bit different. I was thinking all week about fathers, and this Sunday is Father's Day, and I began to think a lot about my dad. I began to think a lot about what kind of father I am, and I began thinking a lot about all the fathers out there, and it's a tough job. It's a tough job, and sometimes it's underappreciated. Sometimes, we make mistakes. Sometimes we screw up, but I began to think about my own father and what he did for me. And so today's episode, I want to talk about fatherhood. During these months of June and July, it's really tough for me. It's Father's Day, number one, and then the following week's usually my dad's birthday. And then 2 weeks after that is the anniversary of his death. This year will mark the 20th anniversary. So he passed away on Friday, July the 13th, 2001, at the VA hospital in West LA. It's kind of a trip to think about how long it's been. 20 years. I mean, it goes fast. You don't think that it flies, but time flies. Time keeps moving, and we just got to deal with it. And for a long time during June and July, it was tough for me. I think it was one of those things where I wanted to be a tough guy and think it doesn't bother me. Of course, I would think about my dad and things like that, but I would always try to put it off. And my wife would always say, "Are you okay?" And I would be like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why? What's the problem?" Right? And for a long time, I would just blow it off. And it took me a while. I'm talking years to finally admit that, there was some things going on and it hurt. And I thought about my dad and I thought about things and finally came to the realization, like, I'm hurting. It's a tough time, especially with Instagram and stuff. And you go on, you see people posting pictures with their father and, making, little dedications to their dads and stuff, and you begin to think, like, man, if only he was here. So with that said, I wanted to talk about my father. I wanted to talk about what I do as a father and what you can do out there. I want to inspire some fathers out there. And my dad was born to basically teenagers, my grandpa and my grandma. And he was raised by his mother. He was the oldest of 5 brothers. He basically raised his younger brothers, looked out for them. His dad wasn't in the home. Would come and visit him every now and then. Him and his brothers had different fathers. So it was tough. It was tough for them growing up. My grandma, early in her life, she was a fun woman, but she was wild, man. She was wild. I love my Nana, though. She ended up giving her life to the Lord and lived a great life until she passed. But my father ended up getting involved in the neighborhood, gangs, he used to call it a 2-bit drug dealer. So I'm not going to glorify that because he hated that about his life. I think my dad always felt like he should have been smarter than that. I could always see like in my opinion, a mixed bag of my dad, right? He grew up in the neighborhood. He was from a gang. He sold drugs, but he was a reader and he went to the Army. I mean, back then the Army was something like guys would go to just to try to clean up their lives and different things, But my dad was like a patriot. It's kind of weird. Like, he loved America. He loved the flag. He loved that he was in the Army. He read history. He knew history. And so he had this mixed thing. And he got my mom pregnant. They were teenagers. He left to the Army. I was born while he was in the Army. And when he came out, it was, the same story. He was doing his thing in the neighborhood and partying and just searching for something better. I think early on, I remember little things, going with him to his friend's house and they drink and play pool, or, some craziness going on in the house. His friend Mundo being stabbed and just, it was just, I wouldn't say it was super crazy, but it wasn't ideal. All right. So, not trying to glorify that lifestyle at all, cause it wasn't good. But, one day my father decided to give his life to the Lord, and he just said, that's enough. And him and my mom decided that the course of our family was going to change. We talked about this before with Marcellus Wiley. We talked about this with past guest Jay Hayslip, a lot of the guys. And I bring this up because, a lot of people don't want to be the foundation for their family. And what I mean by that is somewhere along the line, it has to stop, right? I think somewhere along the line, it has to stop. It has to be like, someone has to say, I'm going to put the family on my back. That's what Marcellus Wiley said. He looked around, he saw his family, and he said, I'm going to put this family on my back. And I believe my dad kind of did that, him and my mom, like, that's enough. My mom's family was from the neighborhood too, and my dad, and it was just, we were headed nowhere quick. I was about 6 years old. My sister Diana was 4, and my sister Della was about 2 years old. They gave their life to the Lord. They began to serve God. And the course of our family was changed. My uncles came to the Lord. A lot of their friends came to the Lord. There was a whole mix of this neighborhood, the Florencia neighborhood in South LA, where a lot of those people came to the Lord. And God used my mom and dad in a powerful way, and then began to use other people. It just wasn't them. But they came to the Lord, and it was known as the Florence Revival at the time, where all these guys from Florence gave their life to the Lord, and their lives began to change. And it just exploded. There's many pastors that came out of that that are out and they're pastoring now. But my dad, he was a guy that was. I always thought he was like, not ashamed of where he came from, but I think he always thought he was smarter and could have done better. I believe his friend Robert Chavez used to kind of say that too. They both were like smart, and they're like better than anybody in the neighborhood. It was just like, man, they got caught up, and it kind of just, man, hit their life, and it just, they felt they could have done better. But thankfully, they gave their life to God at a young age, and my dad got a job for the Southern California Gas Company. At that time, that was just like a great job. We moved. We used to live in the Salt Lake Apartments, the notorious Salt Lake Apartments in Cudahy, and we moved and around the corner. It wasn't like that big of a move, but it went from an apartment to a nice house, right? And as a kid, I just remember going to church, and I remember God touching my family, and God was a part of our family. And I began to learn a lot. And I look back upon my dad and the things he did and how he did them. And I always learn a few things from my dad, and I'll share these. One of the things I learned from my dad was that he was a hard worker. He showed up to work every day for the Southern California Gas Company. He would work crazy neighborhoods, Linwood, South LA, South Central, and he would be a meter reader, or he would be a collector. In those days, a collector would go knock on the door and say, "Hey, you didn't pay your gas bill," and if you don't pay it, I'm going to have to turn off your gas. And you could only imagine going to these neighborhoods and telling people that, right? And kind of this crazy, right? Craziness. And or he would be meter reading. So he'd have to go to the meter and read the meter. And there's dogs, there's different things. I remember one time being amazed because he had a Saturday route. He never worked Saturday, but he worked some overtime. And he goes, "You want to go with me?" I said, "Yeah, I'll go with you. Let's go." And he probably walked like 5 miles. And we were in like South Central. And he walked and he was reading these meters. And the thing that tripped me out about him reading the meters is that my dad would have to go in these yards and they would have dogs. And I'd be like, "Dad, there's a dog right there." "Oh, no worries, son. I got it." And he would punk the dog or flinch on the dog, or he'd get out his spray and spray the dog. And I would be like, "This guy's crazy." And I remember my respect for my dad and what he did was like, I just remember being this kid and be like, "Yeah, Dad, this job is not for me." And I had respect for my dad because of his work ethic. He would be like the top guy in his division at work. He would read all the meters and get like high scores, and he would talk about it. He never missed no days. Went to work sick. Went to work, raining, whatever it was. He was always at work, and it always taught me like, he's a worker. We got to go. We got to be men, show up to work, provide for our family, do what we have to do. That's what men do. So my dad taught me to be a good worker. The next thing my dad taught me, he taught me how to love people. So I would, and I say this because it's a trip. In our house, we had a lot of different people. We would have a Bible study. I mean, and it wasn't a small group, right? Like, people always talk about small groups in church and stuff, and it's cool. But we're talking small groups, and these days we're like 30 people showing up to your house. I mean, crazy. And there would be a mix of people. I'm talking like Chicanos, black, Puerto Rican, just a white. It was just a mix of people. But we would have Bible study. And my dad would be friends. And he would just love people, invite people over. We'd have Thanksgiving, and him and my mom would invite people over, and it would be all kinds of people. And my dad taught me to love people, and that has stuck with me a long time. And even when I'm like in my mood, or maybe I don't want to be bugged by somebody, I begin to think of my dad, and I always say my dad would spend time with this person. My dad would reach out to this person. My dad would call this person. I mean, that's what my dad would do. So he inspired me to be more of a people person, because that's who he was. There's people that are in the church to this day that talk about my dad and what he did in their life. Now, I'm not trying to make my dad into some folk hero like he's the greatest, but he just did what God called him to do. He didn't brag about it. He just did the small things. And it's the small things that count. I remember going back and visiting our home church one day, and I hadn't been there in a few years. And I remember the pastor, she says, "Hey, it's good to see David and Melissa here today." And, I did my little wave thing, yeah, hey. And I remember there's a guy sitting in front of me. The guy turned around and he goes, "Hey, man, you're David Arabello?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Wow." And he goes, "Your dad gave me this Bible like 10 years ago." And I tripped out on that. And it was the little things. It was those type of things that I wasn't tripped out that, my dad did that. I was just like, this guy, he was like super happy to meet the guy's son that gave him his first Bible, basically. And it was those little things. And that's what kind of inspires me in my life, to do small things. To just, send somebody a book, send somebody a text, call somebody, tell somebody I'm thinking about them, where they've been, and when I think of my dad, I think of those things. Those are the things that matter. And it was just doing those small things. It was just loving people. There's pastors to this day, and they'll tell me, your dad made an impact on my life. And I just shake my head, and I'm just amazed because these are great men of God that have went on to do crazy good things. And my dad made a little impact on their life, but they remember that. So I live by that. I try to make small impacts, and hopefully it makes a difference one day. Maybe I don't know that in this life, but maybe in the afterlife I'll know that. And I'm sure my dad got a couple rewards up there when he got there. But he taught me to love people. He also taught me about perseverance, and talked a lot of good about my dad. But my dad, he had made some mistakes in his life. He wasn't perfect. But I give my dad props because when he made those mistakes in his life, he didn't take the easy route to fix those mistakes. He took the hard route. And a lot of men today will make a mistake and sweep it under the rug. They won't address the issue, and it ends up becoming a bigger problem later down the line. But I respected my dad because he had a lot of hardships in his life early on as a kid, later on as an adult, in his spiritual walk. There was things that he'll probably he'd be the first one to tell you that I should have done better. But there was a lot of perseverance. He never quit. He never gave up. Even when he was sick at the end, he persevered, and he was trusting in God for a healing. And it taught me a lot because I think a lot of people would have gave up. I think a lot of people would have not did the hard work. I think a lot of people would have just said, that this is too hard. But the perseverance he had reminds me, on those hard days or the things that, when I'm going through stuff, to say, hey, I can make it. So I'm thankful for my dad and his perseverance. And lastly, my dad taught me was to love God. I know the classic thing is, going to church and all that stuff. But my dad was a guy that would study. He would sit at the table. He would read his word. He would pray. I remember going to junior high, and I think he was a little worried about me, and he said, hey, listen, every day before I drop you off at school, we're going to go to church and we're going to pray. And I thought, maybe a week, no big deal. We went every day for the whole school year. Every day for the whole school year. And I'm not talking about a quick 10-minute prayer session at the church before school. He would pray for about 45 minutes. And I was good for like 8 of those minutes, to be honest with you. And I would pray. I would sometimes fall asleep. He'd nudge me a little bit. But I would listen to him. And I would listen to how he prayed. And that was that's how I learned how to pray. That's where I began to learn how to just talk to God and to love God. And he truly loved God. And no matter what happened in his life, he wanted to do what's right. So the things I learned from my dad: hard work, perseverance, loving people, loving God, are the impacts he made directly on my life. I mean, there's no getting around it. When I think about Father's Day, it's a tough day. I think about him. I think about, what the last 20 years would have been like with him here. Thankfully, he did have some time with my daughter, Ash, when she was little. He did have a couple months with my son. He got to meet his grandson. And I was really thankful for that. But I always think about, what would have happened and what it would have been like. I think about the last times before he got sick. We were playing basketball And I remember being at the park, and we were at Veterans Park in Bell. And we were playing with some guys from church and some guys that were there. And we played some games, and, it was Thanksgiving. And I told my dad, I was already married, so we hooped for a little while. And I said, I'll see you later. I'm going to go over and have Thanksgiving. And I remember going over, and he was feeling a little bit sick. He's like, yeah, I'm not feeling good. I was like, okay. And that was like the beginning of the end for him. He found out that he had hepatitis C. And at the time, it was, it was like, what the heck? What happened here? And he said that it was always, he suspected that it was from homemade tattoos. That's where he got it from. Doctor said, yeah, it could have been dormant in your system for all these years. And I remember him getting mad at me for getting a tattoo, because he's like, did you make sure that it was clean? Da, da, da. And he lived in an era where, tattoos, it would be like a tattoo party in somebody's house or whatever. Everybody would get a tattoo and use the same needle, use the same ink, and it is what it is. But he found out he had hepatitis C. It was a lot different than now. There wasn't as many things to help treat it. There wasn't as many options. But he wanted to believe God, that God was going to heal him from hepatitis. And it got bad. He got really sick, couldn't work anymore. And it was a 4 years of up and down. He was 41. And when he turned 45, he got really sick, and 2 weeks after his birthday, he passed. And I can remember that Friday, and just he was already in a bad state. He wasn't responding, and it was just really bad. And we were there at the hospital. It was in the morning, and my uncle was there, my Uncle Joe, my Uncle Woody, and my mom, and I don't know who else was there, but I just remember, crying and being sad and not understanding why and what happened. And I questioned God. I questioned this situation. Didn't understand. I still don't understand. That's the crazy part. Like, I don't fully understand why. And that's one of the things when we get to heaven, we can ask God why. The Bible says that everything down here is not clear. We can't see it clearly, but one day we will. And I battled with that a lot for a long time. And God began to help me with that and show me. And when I think about Father's Day, I think about my dad, and it brings a smile to my face, a little tear in my eye, no lie. But I think about him, and I think about his birthday. I mean, he would have been it would have been cool to see him an old man. I mean, it would have been fun to see him 65 years old. My dad was always young. I mean, he died basically at the age I am now, and it would be cool to really see him. So my take on everything I learned from my dad is I want to improve upon it, right? I'm going to take all the good stuff that I learned from my dad, and I'm going to take all the stuff that I didn't like, and I'm going to improve upon it. A lot of people begin to blame their parents for everything, right? But the responsibility is on you, basically. When you have kids, the responsibility is on you. You make a commitment to those kids when you have them. I'm your father. I need to show you the way. If I don't know how to do it, I need to find out how to do it. And I took all the things my dad did, that I loved, the 4 things I talked about. I take that he went to all my games. I love that about him. I take that he was always very supportive in things that I did. When I wanted to be a rapper, he'd buy me instrumentals from the Compton swap meet and give me an instrumental and be like, hey, check this instrumental out. It's this group called Proper Dose, and it's a Cutie Pie sample. And I'd be like, what the heck? But he'd find stuff like that, and he'd be fired up and like write a song to it. And he'd be all happy about it. He was a young dad, You know, that's what it was too. And he was very supportive. And I take those things. And then there were some things I was like, man, Dad, you could have, like thinking back, could have been a little bit better about that. But I think about how he was raised and things. And I said, well, he did his best. Let me take that stuff and let me improve upon it. And I tell that to my kids. I say, hey, you know, whatever you don't like about me, whatever you want to improve upon, do it. You be a better father than me. See, my dad laid the foundation. I put the studs in, and now my kids are building the house. So when their kids come, they're going to be good. And I tell this to men. I tell this to fathers. I tell this to married guys, that you don't have an excuse to not improve. The excuse is not, I didn't have that in my home. The excuse is not, I don't know how to love. The excuse is not, you know, anything other than you just need to do it. You know, there's no excuse. If you don't have a great example, you find a good example. You look for a guy at your church, man. Yeah, that guy's a good father. You look for a guy at your job and you say, man, I like that dude, man. He loves his wife or he loves his kids. I want to be like him. And you ask them questions. I mean, you read books. You get some knowledge out of that. You begin to work and get better at it. See, because the kids are only young for a little while, and then they start growing up. And if you start when they're young and you get this information, you're going to make some mistakes. I made mistakes. My dad made mistakes. But if you start really focusing on, I got to get better every day, I got to improve upon, you can do it. And it's going to take some work. It'll take work. Nobody has this manual that says, here's the manual to be a good father. Here's the manual to be a good husband. So you got to train. You got to learn. You got to figure it out. You got to work towards it. But if you make the excuse, I didn't have that in my home, or I didn't have a father in my home. And when I think about my dad and all he's done, and I said, hey, he was a pretty good dad for not having a father in the home with him. You know, and he did his best. And he always tried. There's a lot of great things about him that I love. And anything I don't love, I improve upon. And I tell my kids the same thing. So if you're a young dad out there and you just feel like, man, this is a lot rougher than I am. Yeah, it is a lot. It is rough. But you have no excuse not to become a good father. And those children that you have are only going to be kids for a little bit, and they're going to grow up. And whatever legacy you want to leave behind, whatever you want to pass on to your grandchildren and their grandchildren, it's going to start with you. So work hard. Try to be the best father you can be. Make no excuses. Admit the parts where you're weak, right? I mean, we're men. It's very hard for us to admit that sometimes. But if you say, hey, man, I got to get better at this, it's fine. It's like going to the gym, right? If your arms are weak, I got to work my arms. My chest is weak, I got to work on my chest. Whatever is the weak part of my body, I got to work on, I got to get better at it. You can get better at it. That's my Father's Day podcast. And I hope that inspires some of you out there and maybe helped you guys out in some sort of way. But I want to give props to all the fathers out there and say, be there for your children. Love them. Love their mother. Take care of them. Provide for them. Most importantly, show them God. Show them God. And they'll be all right. Peace. I'm going to head out. It's enough sentimental talk for me. Appreciate you guys listening. Like always, you know, it's a Street Gospel Podcast, man. We out.
Chapter 7. And now behold, I would speak somewhat unto